In a luxurious Manhattan apartment, where tall windows reflected the lights of the evening city, Olivia Carter stood engrossed in a mosaic of lights stretching along the horizon. There was a strange mixture of fatigue and concentration in her gaze. At the age of 42, she achieved everything she dreamed of, but still felt that something was eluding her, something important that money could not buy or sell for status. There was a wedding invitation on her desk, and it was her own wedding. Unlike many others who, at her age, dreamed of vacations on exotic islands or retirement, Olivia stood on the threshold of something she had been thinking about for a long time, but which now seemed so ridiculously close to her. Inhaling the deep, moist smell of the street rain, she ran her fingers over the surface of the letter, as if feeling her life written in someone's words. The groom was someone who initially seemed almost perfect. Dmitri is a successful businessman, a man with character and ambitions, like Olivia herself. He wasn't just a partner, he was someone with whom she could create another world, at least on paper. But when she thought about the wedding, not only happiness and anticipation surfaced in her head, but also memories of her previous marriage, painful as old scars that even time cannot heal. The thought made Olivia sigh. He had been with her once, in another time far from this life, and his face now, like a fragment of an old film, was saying goodbye to her in a murky light. And yet this union was not a mistake. He was nothing more than a part of her quest. Something important that she hadn't found. She took a deep breath, and for a moment a picture of the past rose before her, vivid but painful. Mother and father, James and Eleanor, always preferred Sophia. The relationship between the sisters was complicated, intertwined with competition and unnoticed jealousy. Sophia was the first child that everyone dreamed of, the baby that all eyes were on. And Olivia? She was the one who was born 10 months later, and who, according to their grandmother Martha, was an unexpected gift. As a child, the word unexpectedly seemed to her like some kind of curse. Olivia could hardly imagine what it was like when Sophia was the center of everything, and she herself, restrained and silent, remained on the edge. In all the family photos, Sophia was sitting in the center, attracting attention, and Olivia was standing somewhere on the edge, like a forgotten detail. There was nothing unusual about these pictures, but for Olivia they became symbols. They were always there for Sophia. Sophia was a desirable child, and she was. I was just someone who came later. It wasn't easy, but Olivia learned to accept it. On family trips, as in life, there has always been a difference. Sophia was taken with her, on her birthday and on vacation, and Olivia stayed with her grandparents. This pattern was repeated over and over again. Sophia was the child who was given the love that she seemed to deserve by right of primacy, and Olivia remained only an observer, getting used to the feeling that being in the center was not for her. It wasn't so scary when I was a kid. Perhaps because she couldn't figure out what she was losing without knowing anything else. Nevertheless, those years filled with the distance between the sisters did not remain without a trace for Olivia. These relationships colored her inner world. They became the basis of all subsequent conflicts, not only family, but also professional. In her work, in her relationships with colleagues and friends, she always remained a little in the shadows. She was too independent, too controlling, too cold. And although this cold gave her a sense of security, it always remained in the context of one of the old family truths. Olivia took the invitation in her hands, rolling it into a tight roll. She would have to give an answer soon. And this response meant not just accepting her current life, but also acknowledging how she had built herself. Agreeing to a wedding would not just be getting engaged to the man she loved, but also agreeing to acknowledge her new role, to become someone else. Perhaps with this new person, she would be able to break this painful connection with the past, finally become the woman she once dreamed of. But was it that simple? Olivia looked back at the Manhattan landscape, which now seemed a little alien to her. In this city, where everything is changing so fast, it was difficult to find peace. She was thinking about Sophia, about how there was no way to tell her sister all those words that she had kept for so long. There was no room for forgiveness or regret in their relationship. Sophia always stayed in the center, and she, Olivia, as before, stood on the edge. But now, standing at the window, she realized that this region was not the place to look at her life from. There was another chance ahead. She felt insignificant, as if she were on the outskirts of her own world, but at the same time she felt endless possibilities that beckoned to her, like an unknown horizon promising salvation. These contradictory feelings, constant companions of her life, formed an internal monologue that forced Olivia to look for herself in books, in science, in self-improvement. Her grandfather George, a wise and sensitive man, often told her, "Knowledge is a treasure that no one can take away from you." These words became a beacon for her, illuminating the way when the world around her seemed too gloomy. Olivia grew up a withdrawn child, but her inner world was surprisingly rich. Books became her solace and salvation. She could sit in the library for hours, lost in worlds full of adventure, heroism, and knowledge. It was her way of escaping from reality, where Sophia shone with her popularity, and she remained in the shadows. Olivia tried to prove her worth by solving complex mathematical problems or immersing herself in scientific experiments, but in the eyes of her parents she always remained just a good girl. Never special. "Why don't you be more sociable, like Sophia?" her father, James, once asked. These words touched her to the core. "Go outside, make friends," he added with a hint of irritation in his voice. For Olivia, the outside world has always been a threat. Classmates, like predators, saw her isolation and made her an object of ridicule. Sophia, on the contrary, was popular and beloved. She never needed protection, but she didn't protect Olivia either. One day, during the school holidays, Olivia was the victim of cruel teasing. She was reading a book in the corner of the school library when several classmates surrounded her. "Are you reading again?" one of the girls asked contemptuously. "Do you have any friends at all?" another mocking voice rang out. Olivia blushed and couldn't answer. Her gaze darted in search of salvation, and suddenly she saw Sophia passing by. At that moment, her heart held out hope. But Sophia only cast a cold glance at her sister and said, "Leave her alone. My sister is a little special." This comment caused a burst of laughter among classmates. For Olivia, it was more than any insult. Clutching the book, she ran out of the library and hid in the school bathroom, where she let loose tears. The pain of her sister's betrayal was deeper than the ridicule of her classmates. Over the years, their relationship became more complicated. Sophia shone at school parties, was the queen of the ball, and Olivia, immersed in books, remained unnoticed. She found joy in her studies, but even her successes irritated others. She excelled again, her classmates sighed when she answered the teacher's questions correctly. Proud of her knowledge, Olivia still felt lonely. Libraries and laboratories became her solace. There she could be herself, explore the world and discover new things. One day, while working on a chemical experiment, Olivia made a discovery that delighted her teacher. He praised her for her talent, and she felt proud for a moment. But the joy was short-lived. Sophia, upon learning about this, sarcastically remarked, "You're trying to attract attention with your weird experiments again. I'll tell Mom and Dad." This threat, uttered in a tone of superiority, made Olivia withdraw into herself. The parents, as usual, sided with Sophia. "Don't bother the teachers with unnecessary actions," the father said sternly. "Just sit quietly in class," the mother added. That night, Olivia cried for a long time in her room, wondering why her talent was considered something unworthy. Why could Sophia shine while her achievements remained in the shadows? She decided that one day she would prove her worth to everyone. Her success will be so undeniable that even her parents will recognize her importance. The turning point came when, in one of her drawing lessons, she met a group of girls who, unlike the others, did not condemn her for her intelligence. These girls were the first to see in Olivia not just a strange, quiet girl, but a bright mind and a deep personality. They began to gather after school, discussing philosophy, art, and literature. For Olivia, these meetings were a breath of fresh air. For the first time in her life, she felt the warmth of friendship and acceptance. One day they were sitting in a small cafe around the corner of the school, drinking hot chocolate and arguing about color theory. Olivia was happy. She finally found a place where she was appreciated for who she was and not for what others expected of her. In these conversations, she gained self-confidence, built her future, which no longer depended on what her parents or sister thought of her. Glancing at her watch, she smiled. Life was still ahead. Olivia felt something like happiness slowly blossoming inside her as she began to find a place for herself in life. Over the years, she managed to become part of a circle of people who appreciated her for her intelligence and insight. "Olivia, you are really interesting." The words of Jessica, her old friend, became a real revelation for her. For some reason, she hadn't noticed before how many people were around who were ready to accept her for who she was. But it was at that moment, in those words, that she felt for the first time that her thoughts and opinions had value. Jessica added with a smile that Olivia will always remember, "I wonder why I didn't meet you before." It was like a confirmation that she had finally found her niche. But this happiness, as always, turned out to be short-lived. As soon as she relaxed a little and felt that maybe her place in the world really existed, Sophia appeared, her own sister, who always knew how to find a way to outshine her. Sophia's appearance in Olivia's group was inevitable, as were the clouds in a clear sky. It was not so much a desire to become a part of the team, as an unbearable need to re-establish their superiority. One day, on a very ordinary day, when Olivia's group gathered in the schoolyard, Sophia approached them as if nothing had happened. Her eyes sparkled and her lips stretched into a playful smile. She came over and, without asking permission, said, "Hey, can I join in too?" Her voice was so sweet that it was as if the very air around him was getting a little heavier, as if she was trying to adjust everything to herself, making the world around her a little more comfortable for her vanity. Olivia felt her face turn to stone as the friends fell silent and there was a pause. She knew that Sophia had never harbored any warm feelings for her. On the contrary, since childhood, she has been a constant threat to her, a living reminder that there is someone who will always be there, ready to attract the attention of parents and society. However, Olivia, despite her doubts, could not refuse. She opened her mouth to say something, but at that moment Jessica, obviously seeing the tension in the situation, intervened. "I'm sorry, Sophia, but this group," she said, but her words didn't sound confident. It was all too obvious. Olivia, despite the fact that she understood the absurdity of the situation, still felt a chill of trouble shackle her. Sophia's eyes darkened and her face became as hard as a stone. She stood in this strange balance between the desire to be accepted and the irritation that she was rejected. A moment ago, her face was innocent and playful, but now it has become fierce, like a predator trapped in a trap. "Why won't you let me join you?" Her voice was laced with such fury that the echo of her words echoed through the hallway, causing everyone present to freeze for a few moments. Sophia's voice echoed in Olivia's ears, and the very cold and tension in her chest seemed to make the air heavy. At that moment, Olivia realized that for Sophia, her existence would always be a hateful reminder of something she could never get the full attention and love of her parents. That evening was the beginning of a new stage for Olivia. After this incident, Sophia complained to her parents, rubbing her complaints, tears, and offended words into their ears. Olivia behaved rudely. "She did not allow me to join her group. It hurt me so much." The parents, of course, took the side of their eldest daughter, not even thinking that Olivia had experienced her own grievances and the humiliation of being in the background all my life, as if I were invisible. "You've always been so rude to Sophia," James said one evening when they were all sitting at dinner. His words were cold and devoid of even a shadow of understanding. He couldn't understand how hard it was for Olivia, how long she hid her feelings behind a mask of calm. "You're the eldest," Eleanor added reproachfully, as if seniority in itself was supposed to be an excuse for all the injustices she had endured. These words penetrated her soul like a knife, exacerbating old grievances that had been pressing on her since childhood. Olivia couldn't and wouldn't explain. She had been silent for too long. But at that moment, when her own family could not see her pain, she took a step back, hiding behind the walls of her inner world. The betrayal of her family hurt Olivia far more than any physical pain she had ever suffered. That night, when her parents were with Sophia in the hospital, supporting her as always, Olivia was left alone with her own feelings, almost unaware of how deeply it hurt her soul. Sophia is an eternal beloved, an eternal sign of happiness in the family. Even at the moment when her actions became inexplicable, she still remained the center of the world for their parents. "It was an accident," her father, James, said over and over again, like a spell to justify Sophia's every action, her every word, her every look. Olivia was sitting in the hospital waiting room, her face hidden from the world, and although the physical pain from the blow to the head was subsiding, her heart was filled with resentment, bitterness, and perhaps even despair. She could no longer understand how Sophia was always the center of attention, even when she was hurting her. There was no justice in the way they continued to defend her without trying to get into what was really going on. Sophia didn't mean what she did, as always, an excuse for her actions that seemed enough to forget about the consequences. Soon, sitting in that gray, cold waiting room, Olivia felt tears begin to fill her eyes. They fell without stopping, and she realized that she could no longer contain her pain, could no longer hide from what was happening in her family. It was all too much. She, like no one else, knew what love was. But the love in her house was strange, painful, somehow invisible and distorted. And she couldn't stay quiet and silent anymore. A nurse approached her, whose voice was warm and caring, like a soft blanket that wraps around you in the coldest moments. "Are you okay?" "What happened?" she asked, and her eyes expressed neither condemnation nor curiosity, only genuine concern. Olivia hesitated. She had never talked to anyone about what was going on in her family before. It was too personal, too painful, and she always thought she could handle it on her own. But now, at a moment when everything seemed infinitely difficult, she felt the words coming out of her mouth by themselves. Olivia took a deep breath and, closing her eyes, began to talk. About how Sophia always stayed in the center, how she was always protected, how her parents never noticed what was happening to her. About how resentments and feelings gradually grew in her soul, like wounds that did not heal. About how she couldn't stay in her sister's shadow anymore, couldn't just be the good girl everyone thought she was. She talked about how her parents turned away from her, about how unfair she felt in her home, in her own world. The nurse listened attentively without interrupting, her eyes nodding gently from time to time, showing that she understood that she was not judging. When Olivia finally fell silent and her last words died down, the nurse paused, looking at her with careful compassion. "I'm worried about your safety," she said quietly but confidently. "Can I contact child protection?" Olivia froze for a moment. This offer was like an icy cold that breaks into a warm house, but at the same time as a chance for salvation. Thoughts immediately swirled in her head, feelings became confused, and she felt her heart constrict. It was a decision that could change everything. She could do it, take a chance, tell the whole world what was happening to her, and maybe finally be heard. But what does it mean for her family? How will this affect her relationship with her parents, with Sophia? However, deep down, Olivia knew that if she did not do this, if she did not let someone understand what was happening, then her life would remain as it had been until now, a life creeping in the shadow of fear and unspoken words. And although she was scared, she knew that if she didn't take this step now, it might be too late later. "Yes," she said, pronouncing the word with difficulty. Yes, please get in touch. It was the only way to change something in her life. And maybe finally find the peace she's been looking for so long. The participation of the Child Protection Service caused a real storm in the family. When her parents found out, they were horrified. James and Eleanor, who always tried to hide from others any signs of family problems, could not believe that their own daughter had asked for help. It was like a lightning strike, something that could not be ignored, which forced them to look at their own lives from a completely different angle. But it was too late. Olivia decided that her safety was the most important thing, that her right to happiness and peace should finally become a priority. Everything she had once considered important, family, relationships, love, was now tainted, and she could no longer return to the state she had been in before. Olivia's eyes lit up when she realized that the opportunity she had been waiting for was opening up in front of her. It was a rare opportunity that could change her life, give her a chance at something real, something that had nothing to do with her past. From time to time, when thoughts of her family weighed on her, she felt a painful tightness in her chest. Communication with his parents was rare, almost formal, greeting cards, a few words in telephone conversations. They continued to live their lives, in which Olivia was almost a stranger. No words of support, no interest in her life. Everything remained at the level of superficial phrases, and despite her success and achievements, this relationship remained only a pale reflection of what she once wanted from them. Sometimes, at night, Olivia would go through old family albums. The photos in them were always the same, her smiling parents, Sophia standing in the center, as a kind of embodiment of harmony and happiness. Olivia was always kind of on the edge of these pictures, as if her place was in the shadows. Every time she looked at these photos, her heart was filled with complex emotions, bitterness and pain from the fact that she had never really been a part of this ideal world. A world in which Sophia was always the first, and she, like a little shadow, only watched other people's victories. In her sophomore year of college, Olivia met Ethan at the library. It was a law student whom she happened to be with when she was looking for a rare book. Ethan was tall, with a melancholic look and a listening ability that is rare in people his age. He didn't try to appear better than he was, and immediately realized that Olivia wasn't the kind of person who liked to be the center of attention. He perceived her intelligence and quiet, introverted nature as something valuable, not needing decorations and external signs of success. With him, she felt that her individuality could be understood and accepted. It was a new and amazing feeling. They often met in the library, where, together, they spent long hours reading and talking about books and life. Ethan asked her questions that made her think, and her answers, she noticed, always aroused his sincere interest. He didn't find her strange or taciturn, as others often did. On the contrary, he admired her intelligence, her ability to see the world, on the other hand. They were both introverts, but their silence was not painful, but harmonious. "You are an incredible person," Olivia once said when Ethan noticed how she approached a difficult legal task, analyzing it from the point of view of logic and philosophy. Those words slipped through with ease, like a confession she couldn't have made before. Ethan, unburdened by the need to impress, just smiled. "I can't believe we haven't met before," he replied, looking at her with respect and slight surprise. These words were not just a compliment for Olivia, but a confirmation that she was important, that her existence made sense to someone who understood her. So, their relationship began to develop. Olivia and Ethan became not just friends, but a real couple, in which both understood each other without words. They were connected not only by their love of knowledge, but also by a deep respect for each other. With him, Olivia felt for the first time that she could be herself, without fear of being misunderstood or rejected. Their walks around the university campus together became a real celebration for her, moments when she could afford to be vulnerable without fear that it would be used against her. However, despite all this intimacy with Ethan, sometimes Olivia felt the weight of the past again. When she came home, where there was still no place for her sincerity, for her true emotions, When she was faced with cold, formal conversations with her parents again, something in her suddenly stopped. She felt how difficult her past, with its resentments and disappointments, continued to influence her present, like an invisible thread pulling her back. But with Ethan, it was different. She could be open with him. He did not demand changes from her, did not expect her to become different. He just loved her for who she was. And this was what she had been looking for all her life, a place where her opinions, her feelings, and her essence matter, where she can be accepted, without regard to other people's expectations. The preparations for the wedding went on as usual, but Olivia's soul was restless. The decision to invite her parents and Sophia was not only a challenge for her, but also an attempt to break the vicious circle of resentments that had lived in her heart for many years. She knew that their presence could bring both joy and disappointment. Her hope for reconciliation with her family was faint, like a trembling flame in a cold wind, but inside there was still a desire to find the harmony she had dreamed of since childhood. Her grandparents were her mainstay during this difficult period. Every evening they called her, reminding her that happiness is her right, and that on this day everything should be as she wants. "Don't let the past steal your future," her grandmother used to say, and these words sounded in her head like a quiet motif of hope. Grandfather, for his part, was sure that his role at the wedding was an honor he could not even dream of. "I'm proud of you, Olivia," he kept saying, and it was more than just support. It was love that she had not received from her parents more than once. Meanwhile, Ethan stayed by her side, his calmness and confidence filling her with determination. He understood that for Olivia, this day was more than just a celebration of love. It was the point where her past and present intersected to leave one behind and build another. "You're doing the right thing, Olivia," he said one evening as they sat on the floor of their apartment among boxes of decorations and invitations. "Whatever the outcome, you will be able to look forward with a pure heart." 2 weeks before the wedding, her phone rang. Sophia's room. Olivia hesitated at first, but then, gathering her courage, she answered. Sophia's voice was cold, but it didn't have the same sharpness. "Olivia," she began, I don't want to fight with you." The words were so unexpected that Olivia was momentarily speechless. Sophia continued, "I know that a lot of things went wrong between us, and maybe it's my fault. But I don't want this to stay between us forever." These words penetrated deep into Olivia's heart. She listened to her sister, trying to figure out how sincere it was. "I want to come to your wedding," Sophia finished. "And I promise I won't ruin this day. Just let me be there." After the conversation ended, Olivia sat in silence for a long time. Sophia's words were unexpected, and their sincerity was doubtful, but a small spark of hope broke through in her heart. Maybe, after all these years, Sophia really wants a change. The wedding day has arrived. The scent of flowers was in the air, mixed with the gentle whisper of the spring wind. The garden where the ceremony took place was decorated in soft pastel colors, reflecting Olivia's exquisite taste. The guests began to gather, and Olivia, watching from a small room, was preparing for the most important moment in her life. Her dress, made especially for this day, was as light as a breath, and she felt like a bride not only in the eyes of others, but also in her soul. The door opened quietly and her grandfather came in. He looked solemn, but there was a warm tenderness in his eyes. "You look beautiful, Olivia," he said, giving her his hand. "Ready?" She nodded, feeling his support fill her with confidence. The ceremony has begun. When Olivia, holding her grandfather's hand, entered the garden, all eyes were on her. She noticed her parents sitting among the guests. Their faces remained stony, but their presence indicated that they had decided to support her after all. Next to them was Sophia, who met her gaze and smiled faintly. It wasn't the smile she remembered from the past, full of superiority, but something softer, almost conciliatory. When she reached the altar, her heart was beating as if it wanted to break out. Ethan stood there, waiting, his eyes shining with love and confidence. "I love you," he whispered as she stood next to him. And these words erased all fear and doubt. The ceremony was like a fairy tale. The words of the oath, spoken with feeling, seemed imprinted in eternity itself. The guests applauded, and the sun shone on their faces with a warm light, as if blessing their union. At the reception, when the music was playing and the guests were enjoying the treats, Olivia noticed her mother get up and walk towards her. For a moment, she felt her insides tighten. "Olivia," Eleanor began, her voice not as harsh as usual. "You were incredible today. I'm proud of you." These words were unexpected, and Olivia felt tears coming to her eyes. This day was not only the beginning of a new life for her, but also, perhaps, the first step towards healing old wounds. Sophia approached her like a shadow of the past, floating out of a dark corner. Her appearance was unexpected, but not shocking. Olivia, deep down, knew that this moment would come one day. Sophia stood a little to the side, as if choosing the right words. Her expression was unfamiliar, not arrogance, not superiority, but something more vulnerable. "You look beautiful," she finally said, her voice low, almost trembling. Olivia looked at her, her heart stopping for a moment. The words she had wanted to hear from her sister for so long had finally come out. But what was behind them, sincerity or a familiar game? "Thank you, Sophia," she replied, trying to remain calm, although everything was boiling inside. Her fingers tightened on the thin champagne glass, as if it might help her keep her balance. "What are you doing here?" Sophia took a step closer, her gaze intense but not hostile. "I wanted to apologize," she finally said, lowering her eyes. "I know I've done a lot of wrong things, and maybe this day is not the best time to talk. But I couldn't help but come. I couldn't help but see how happy you look." Olivia was silent, not knowing how to react. Her whole life had been a struggle for the recognition and love of this woman who stood in front of her now, finally ready to admit her mistakes. But at that moment, Olivia realized that she no longer needed it. Her happiness no longer depended on Sophia's approval. She survived, she built her life despite all the obstacles. "Did you come alone?" asked Olivia, feeling her voice getting firmer. Sophia nodded. "Mom and Dad. They couldn't. I think you know why." Her words carried not only an excuse, but also a hidden request for understanding. Olivia took a deep breath, feeling the memories of the past, vivid and painful, pop up in her mind. But this time they didn't capture her. She was stronger than those shadows, stronger than the resentment and bitterness that accompanied her. "Thank you for coming," she finally said. Her words did not sound like a cold gesture, but like a step towards. She didn't know if she would ever forgive Sophia completely, but now she was ready to let go of at least part of the load. Sophia didn't seem to expect this. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly turned away, trying to hide them. "I've always envied you," she suddenly blurted out, her voice trembling. "You've never tried to please everyone like I have. You've always been yourself. And I've been trying to be perfect all the time. For them, for everyone." Olivia felt a strange combination of empathy and fatigue come over her. Envy? Is she? It was almost ridiculous. But as she listened to her sister, she began to realize that Sophia was also a prisoner of their family, only in a different role. If Olivia was fighting for recognition, then Sophia was forced to meet expectations. "We both suffered," Olivia finally said, her voice soft but firm. "But that's not an excuse for everything that happened. You should have known better." Sophia nodded, her face serious. "You're right. But I want to change that. If not for us, then at least for yourself." A silence hung between them, filled with thoughts and emotions that did not require words. Then Sophia stepped forward, hugged her sister and whispered, "I'm sorry." Olivia didn't answer right away. Her hands were paralyzed. But after a few moments, she hugged Sophia back, not as a sign of complete forgiveness, but as the first step towards something new. "I'll try," she whispered back. It wasn't a promise, but it was a start. When Sophia walked away, her face was calm, and for the first time in a long time she looked genuinely happy. "You're happy, Olivia," she said. "That's all that matters." Sophia returned to the hall, leaving Olivia at the window. Her sister had given her a lot, both pain and challenges, but at that moment Olivia felt that a certain part of her heart had finally healed. Olivia stood looking at the city lights, which now seemed softer, warmer to her. Ethan's voice came from behind her. "Is everything okay?" He came over, gently putting his arm around her shoulders. "Yes," she replied, smiling. Her gaze was fixed forward into the future. "Everything is really fine now." Olivia was sitting at a large desk in her cozy apartment. The evening light fell softly on the pages of her diary, where she wrote down her thoughts. This ritual became a way for her to comprehend all the changes that were taking place in her life. It had been several months since the wedding, but there were still echoes of the past inside her. The message from her parents made her heart sink, the words of regret, long awaited, but so late, mixed joy with pain. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the envelope into which she had folded the letter she had written in reply. Her soul wasn't ready for the meeting yet, but she knew she couldn't ignore this attempt. "Dear Mom and Dad," she began, "I thank you for your letter. I'm glad you decided to write, and I hope that one day we can talk. I'm not ready for the meeting yet, but I know it's possible in the future. Thank you for your understanding. Olivia." Her therapist advised her to take her time. "You need to give yourself time to figure out what you want," he said softly. It was a path she was just starting on. The process of reflection and forgiveness had been a long one, but now she had enough resources to deal with it. She felt Ethan's support, the care of her grandparents, and the confidence that her inner world was finally finding balance. One warm autumn evening, Olivia and Ethan decided to have a dinner for close friends and family. They cooked together, discussing plans for the future. "You know, I'm thinking about starting my own analytical firm," Olivia confessed as she sliced vegetables for a salad. Ethan, who was arranging the plates, stopped to look at her. "That's a great idea, Olivia. You have everything you need to do it. What's stopping you?" She smiled, "Probably just your own fears." He walked up to her, put his arm around her shoulders and looked into her eyes. "You have already proved to yourself and the world that you are capable of more than just working for a large company. You deserve to create something of your own that will reflect your uniqueness." These words brought a smile and a surge of confidence from her. With him, she felt capable of anything. Her closest people were at the dinner. Grandma Martha and Grandpa George shared stories from their youth, friends joked and laughed, and Ethan, as always, carefully made sure that everyone had full glasses. Olivia looked at this scene and felt her heart fill with warmth. It was her family. Not the one that circumstances forced on her, but the one that she created herself. These people were her mainstay, her home. At the end of the evening, Grandpa George raised his glass and made a toast. "Olivia, you are our inspiration. We are proud of you, your strength and ability to build a life the way you want. We know that you have many more achievements ahead of you, and we will always be there for you." Tears stood in Olivia's eyes as she thanked her grandfather, realizing how much his words meant to her. The night was quiet. Olivia stood at the window in their bedroom, looking out at the city lights. Manhattan had its own life, its rhythm was endless, but now Olivia felt part of that rhythm. Ethan appeared next to her, his arms gently wrapped around her shoulders. "Are you thinking about your parents?" he asked, guessing her thoughts. Olivia nodded. "Yeah. Sometimes I think that maybe I can forgive them." But it won't be an easy process. Ethan squeezed her shoulder lightly. Forgiveness doesn't have to be quick. The main thing is that it should be sincere. Not for them, but for you. She smiled as she turned to him. You always know what to say. Because I'm listening to you, he replied, and his smile made her feel truly loved. The next day, Olivia sent a letter to her parents. She took a long time choosing words, wanting to express everything she felt without losing her honesty. She knew that this step was important, not for them, but for herself. Forgiveness does not mean forgetfulness, she told herself. But it's liberating. The new chapter of her life was full of hope. Olivia planned to start her own business, establish a relationship with her parents if possible, and continue to build her life next to Ethan. She knew there would be difficulties ahead, but she was no longer afraid of them. Her past no longer held her captive, and the future beckoned like the morning light, promising new opportunities.